Welcome, everybody. My name is Christian Spacek, and I'm very happy to introduce you Kerstin Svensson as our keynote lecturer for today. She will hold the final keynote on professionality and professionalism. And I think it's very good that we can get an international perspective today on the topic. We had some very thoughtful considerations also in the morning about profession and professionality, and now I think it's interesting to compare maybe the concepts also from an international perspective. Kerstin Svensson is a professor for social work at the School of Social Work at Lund University in Sweden, and currently she is also director of the Research School for Social Work Professionals. That's a graduate school for practice research created between 4 different Swedish universities. Kerstin Svensson's research focus is mainly directed to the question of how practice and organizations and professionalism are developed in social work and how they have developed in relation to history and society. Her special attention is directed to knowledge creation and knowledge distribution, and the relationship between social workers and client within the field of tension of support and control. And also she did a lot of research about the question how professionals act within organizations. So I think we have many connections to our conference theme and also to the activities of the last 2 days. Kerstin Svensson has studied this aspect, especially in relation to the issues of crime, abuse, and youth. And we are very happy to have you here today with the international perspective on the development of social work as profession. I'm very happy to announce your final keynote with the title Professionality and Professional Identity of Social Work, International Perspective from Theory, Research and Practice. So welcome to you, Kerstin Svensson. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you for a very detailed presentation and introduction, and I must say I am very, very honored to be part of this conference, and I'm so happy for all of you attending this session, being in English, being on a Saturday afternoon and everything. So I'm very happy that we can share this moment together. And now I want to share my screen. But I cannot. I think. Yes.
You can.
Now you can see it.
Yeah, we see it. Great.
Perfect.
Right. So, as I said, something about professionality and professional identity of social work on the international perspective. And it being international perspective doesn't mean that I would go through what happens in different parts of the world, but you will see along the way what I mean by the international perspective. I could also say that I'm sitting in Lund University in the south of Sweden, and the picture you see here is how it actually looks just at the moment now with a blooming magnolia outside the main building of the university. It happens a week each year, and this is the week. So, theoretical and empirical reflections from an international perspective will mean that I will go back to basic. I will talk about professionalism and professions. I will give an international perspective through the sociology of professions, the theoretical, mostly sociological perspective. I will move on via the 3 pillars of social work, and as Malcolm Payne has pointed out. And I will give a Swedish example and conclude on how to understand professionalism and professionalization in social work. So to start with, being profession or being professional. There is a problem with the concept of professionalism, because that is something we all want to be. It's what you could say when you're not so polite, you could say it's a bullshit concept. Because a bullshit concept is something that isn't allowed to say not and still be accepted. You can never say that, oh no, a professional, I don't want to be professional. It's an ideal we have in all practices. So, and then being professional means more or less the same in all occupations, because it's mean being at work, take on the professional role, and not being personal or private. You can say that when you are buying something in a shop, and the shop attendant is sitting and talking in phone or in any sense working with his or her phone, that's not professional, because it's something professional, something personal. To be professional is in that role is to meet the client in the shop and do the thing that you are supposed to do. So being a professional social worker, in one sense, is to do the things that you are supposed to do. But as we will come back to, it's a bit problematic of closing the personal and private role, because you have to, in social work, you're also expected to act as a person. The personal interaction is important. So the professional role is a little bit blurred. But what about representing a profession, being professional as a social worker, the profession of social work? That's about having a specific expertise, knowing something that people do not know if they are not social workers. And different professions have different expertise. So there is something of being a professional social worker. There is another thing about being a professional teacher or a lawyer or any other occupation. A profession is something else than being professional. And the professions are stratum in society. A level of society also often mentioned as middle class. They are people with higher education that are formed into different kind of professions, and they have higher education. But so there is the professions and the profession, the specific one. So the sociology of professions had spent much time on discussing of what are the characteristics of a profession. And you can, if you read any text about professions, they start in this in some way. And they all get back to education, and then it means research-based education, scientifically connected. The ability to implement knowledge in practice. So it's not only to know, but it's also to use the know and to use the knowledge. And there are some kind of institutional mechanism for control, and there is a responsibility to use the competence, which means that if you are a strong profession, you have a professional body where you will be excluded if you do something that is wrong in the organization's meaning. So the professional associations, they are there as a support, but also as a control for the content of the profession's actions. And then there is the professional ethics. These are the terms that in different ways come back in discussions of what is a profession. And there has been, just to go very quickly through them, there has been some central ideas starting in Max Weber and his ideas of professionalization in the bureaucracy, where you should have a specific knowledge in order to be able to perform specific tasks. And people with that knowledge should be on certain positions so that the bureaucracy will be functioning in its best way. But he also took up the idea of a profession closing their field, not having monopoly and not leaving room for others, and the power and struggle around knowledge and the struggle around the monopoly. Magalisa Fati-Larsson in 1977, her book of the rise of professionalism, she focused this controlling expertise and the ethics and how they were interrelated in and formed a social, helped to form social status for the professions. And Andrew Abbott in 1988 in his The System of Professions, he talked about professions as a social system and the competition between the jurisdictions. So this is what the classical sociology of professions has dealt with. But then in later years, in the 21st century, we have some other theories that discuss both the position of professions in society and in relation to the organizations where they do practice. So Elliot Fredson's book on professionalism as a third logic, where he shows that we have the market and the idea of the market and the ideas of bureaucracy. Beyond that, we also have the ideas of what it means to have professional practice. So it's a third logic, and he gives a very good picture of the way you can that you can use to understand the different logics that are present in the same practice. But as Julia Everts then said, the logics cannot be separated, because if we look on how it is today in different practices, the market, the bureaucracy, and the professionalism, these three logics, they are intertwined. They work together. So in practice, there are either what she calls an occupational professionalism that is based on the occupation as such, the specific knowledge for the specific profession, or an organizational professionalism where the governing principles comes from the organization that is responsible for the work. I could say already now that as a critique that organizational professionalism could also be questioned whether it is professionalism, if it's more of organizational issue than it is professionalism. But I will come back to that. And then we have Mirko Nordengraf that has talked about hybrid professionalism, going back to this idea that everything is so complex and intertwined today, that when we act as professionals, we have to be reflexive on our personal knowledge and professionalism, and establish in each practice meaningful connections between clients, what we do at the work, and how the action is organized. So we have what he says is that we have to consider each practice by themselves. So that is a little bit about where the ideas of sociology of profession stands. And then back to social work, or I shouldn't say back to social work, because Mirko Nordengraf also takes his example from social work, but still, back to basics, and Abraham Flaxner from 1915, who questioned is social work a profession, and did that from a distinction between amateur and professional, and focused on having paid, making a full-time job of it. But also talked about the professional spirit, that this has to have the genuine professional spirit. And the professional spirits, that's something beyond the knowledge. It's something more than just having knowledge. It's also about some kind of the spirits, some kind of feeling, some kind of aspect with a humanitarian and spiritual aspect or element. But social work is institution bound, I would say. Back to the organizations, because social work is always performed by actors in organizations. It's very, very hard to be a social worker by yourself. most often you are a social worker through in the name of an organization. It could be a public organization, or it could be an faith-based organization or a private company or anything, but still you are acting in the name of an organization. And then the organization governs the professional role. You get different professional role as a social worker in different organizations. So that's why I lifted the critique against Julia Everts and the organizational profession, because it could be questioned whether you actually are professional in the organization or you are just the organization's actor. Because if you are professional, you're supposed to use something of your professional knowledge when you act. But if the organization also provides the knowledge and the rules and regulation and maybe manuals for how you should work, it could be all reasons to do, as Nordengraf suggests, to actually go into detail in what way are you professional here. And as the Canadian sociologist of professions, Valérie Fournier, has said that professionalism, the idea, since professionalism is so positive, since it's something we all want to be, it is also a part of a disciplinary mechanism in organizations. And what we see in Sweden is that you can, a lot of large organizations, they have different steps you can take to be more and more professional within the organization. You get higher competence. You can also get higher salary if you do some of the internal courses they give through the organization. The organization decide what knowledge you should have. And that is what Valérie Fournier means. That is a kind of disciplinary mechanism for getting the workers to do the work that the organization wants them to be. So that is the critical question around whether social work are a profession today. In some organizations, maybe it's not so good to have, maybe they're not so interested in having professional actors. They want to have people that follow the guidelines. If we then look at the definition of social work, the international definition, we don't have anything about the organizations. We have it about the practice-based academic. It's about having the knowledge, doing a certain practice, having principles, and being underpinned by theories of social work, social science, humanities, and indigenous knowledge. So it's about the profession as such. We don't consider the organization in the definition of social work, even if social work needs its organization. So we have some kind of tension here. And then we have the social work ethics, where social work is based on respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all people, and that we should also promote social justice. It neither says anything about how we should relate to the organization. As I assume that you are well familiar with this, I just will walk them through very, very fast. And the same with the three pillars or the three views of social work, as Malcolm Payne has pointed out. As I'm coming more and more towards talking about that social work it is hard to consider social work as one unit. And as he said, there are three pillars, views, or there are a lot of different concepts for what it is, three forms of social work. Therapeutic, social order, or transformational, that in his different texts, they have changed name a little bit, but it's also been considered as therapeutic, reflective, individualist, conformist, or collective socialists. yeah, I think the second term was the one that was used first, and then it was shortened in later texts. If we look at them, we see the first one, it's about therapeutic and reflective. It's about individual, working with individual and individuals' minds, you could say. Social order is also individualist. It's also working with individuals, but individuals in society, in the social setting. And then we have the transformational, that is, it's about working more with a context, with a setting, of course, still with people, but more about the social context where people live. And as I understand it, this is where we find community work in different ways. So when we look at the two first ones, they are more working with individuals, and the third one is more working with community work in different ways. So keep this in mind, and we will come back to them soon with my Swedish example. We're moving towards Sweden from the more broader international perspective. We can talk about professionalism from above or below, because this sociology of professions, the theoretical knowledge on professions, it's to a very high degree based on the situation in the Anglophone countries, the English-speaking countries. And they emphasize the occupation's struggle for influence, closure, and jurisdictions. The idea that the occupations has something to say themselves. And when they gain a position, when they are acknowledged by the state, and they have the right to give out license, etc., by the state. So we have the professions comes first, and then the state are acknowledged them, and then they have a status. But when we have studied in Sweden, we see that it is the state that has introduced, formed, and defined the professions all the way when we look back. And it's not only, it is the universities, they are implemented by the state. The higher education came when the state needed different competences, starting with the legal profession, the medical professions, the military professions, which also led to the engineers, to working with, in Sweden, the mining industry. When it started to grow, there was a need of engineers. So it's not only about the professions that care with people, but all professions has actually been promoted by the state in Sweden. And so has also the professional organizations. They have been introduced and formed or you can say with the help of the state. So we haven't had that struggle where the professions claim room and licenses, and then the state acknowledge it. So we have seen another kind of process. So we saw this when we were studying what we call the professional landscape. And we had then, from the beginning in the historical phase, the long historical perspective, we had 6 fields. And then when we studied the contemporary situation, we added yet one more, which is economy, the field of economy, because it was a very strong one from the 1980s and onwards. I don't know if I have the whole picture with me here, but still, the main things are there, those in red about the social workers. Because we talked about the professional landscape, this strata in society with educated people are divided into different kind of fields. Then we have academy, which we talk about as a key professions, because within academia we are professional in a certain way, we have the level of professionalism where you have a different kind of positions in the systems. And then, but still, we are also the ones who are educating people for the other fields. So that's why the academic professions are the key professions. And then we have the field of education and social regulation. I can see that I have adjusted the letters here, but social regulation and psychosocial integration. And then we have medicine and technology. But when we talk about social workers, we should add them somewhere. Do we deal with social regulation or psychosocial integration as social workers? During the project, we also discussed the terms of help or support and control, but we couldn't divide it that way because we are all dealing with both control and support in different ways. So we went back to the Durkheimian concept of how is a society kept together? It's kept together by social regulation, but also by psychosocial integration. So by social regulation, we mean the regulating those deviant in society that we want to make them do as they are supposed to do. And also that they working with social regulations means to work in a law-based context where you make assessments and decisions in relation to law. And psychosocial integration is working with the individual to wanting to be integrated and supporting individual to be integrated and function in society. And then in each field, you have a classic profession that we relate to. And social workers relates both to the legal professions and to what is called professions. Psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychotherapists. Counselors in social work, they relate mainly to the complex of professions, while those working in different kind of authorities making decisions in social tasks, they relate to judges and lawyers and how to understand the law and how to implement the law. So here we can see that we do have, at least in Sweden, social workers that relate to different classic professions. And from that, I would say that we have two branches of social workers. It goes back to also what Payne's talked about, the social order and the therapeutic. We have the one working with regulating the population, working on the basis of regulations, who have explicit control but implicit support. And then we have the therapeutic psychosocial integration that focus on individuals and aims towards the person's will and self-conception. And they have explicit support, but implicit control. So a little bit more about them, that when we see what are their position in Sweden at the moment. Well, the group of psychosocial integration, they are a group of social workers in a process of professionalization. And it's gaining a stronger position in the multidisciplinary team where they work. 2019, now soon 3 years ago, in July, social workers in healthcare got a license in Sweden. They form an extra year of study after their social work degree. They can be licensed healthcare counselors. And this is the first license for social workers in Sweden. And there has also recently come a legislation that schools do have to have psychosocial expertise within the schools, not referring to any other. The school has to have it. Still, these groups, of course, they have the same problem as everyone else in the era of new public management and the scarce economy and so. But still, they have a position. They are asked for. They have to be there. When we then look at the social regulation, we see in Sweden a group of social workers in the process of deprofessionalization. They get more and more manuals for how to perform their work. They are told all the time how to work, and they have schemes and checklists they have to work from, and they become more and more strict. Just yesterday, I heard how this book of manuals at one workplace for every time it was revised, it just grew and grew more and more. And the state, as I have said, have a huge importance here. They focus on knowledge gap in social work. And they claim that there is no research in social work. Social work is a huge knowledge gap. We have to give them manuals to work from because there is no research. And they, apart from that, they have very tough working conditions with a high level of very much to do, short said, and a high level of job turnover. People leave that sector. And in one dissertation from Lund University last year, it was shown also the career of social workers, that social workers very often start here in this field, and then they move on to other fields, mainly to the more therapeutic ideals of social work. So, which also means that when it concerns child protection, we have very many new social workers without experience that work in that difficult sector because of the working conditions and because of the very, very small room for professionalism. Apart from that study, as I talked about the fields and where we saw the two different fields, I did a survey with social workers in Sweden with 500 respondents. And I won't go into details about the methodology because I just want to show you one picture. But I asked questions about the social workers' relation to their organization. And when analyzing the material, I split the respondents up into the two groups of psychosocial integration and social regulation. So the one group works with investigations, assessments, decisions, and are employed by authorities. And the other group, they work with therapeutic tasks, counseling, and similar things. And they are not, none of them are managers. And what I found then when I asked the questions, I had a statement. My task is to contribute to the organization's goal fulfillment. And I was very surprised how they really fell out to be very, very different. Because those working in psychosocial integration, just a few of them agreed that their task was to fulfill the organization's goal. While quite many of those working with social regulation thought that was their role. They have totally different views of what their role was in relation to the organization's goal fulfillment. And it also showed in another, I don't have any picture of that, but it also showed in another aspect that when asking about what do you base your work on, those in psychosocial integration, they were more marked that their work was based on scientific training and empathy, while those in social regulation, to a higher degree, said that their work was based on guidelines and regulations. So they had different ways of regarding their relation to their work and to their profession, their organization. So coming towards the end, I will start summing up. What is specific in being being a professional social worker? There is cognitive aspects, what we know and what we think, and they are intraprofessional. There is something about being a social worker. We do relate to each other, even over the international context or between organizations. We have something in common, but we also have a problem in claiming explicit, specific expertise and get acknowledged for that. How shall we be acknowledged for that? We actually do know something about how it is to be a human being in society and how humans and society interrelate. So that is a very, very generic aspect. And it's also things that a lot of people claim to know how it is, because we are human beings, all of us. And that is the difficult thing, to claim our specific knowledge that we know that we have when we meet. And then we could go back to that. What is generic for social work? We can see that it's different in different contexts, in different organizations. But what is the core? What is generic for social work? Not depending on where you work. So because you have to separate what is generic and what is specific. And then we have the social aspect of social work being institution bound, that we are dependent on the organizational demands in the different organizations where we work. And there is the classical dilemma of the street level bureaucrat, as Lipsky calls it, that there are intentions about in the expectations of what should this organization do, and the knowledge we have as a profession, and the ethics we have, and the ideas of doing good for people. So, and that is, of course, what is possible to change from inside. And so in some aspects, there are things that are possible to change inside. In some aspects, maybe some areas should be left so that social workers, shouldn't be performed in the name of social work, some aspects, to put it quite hard. So finally, to sum up, what I've talked about is that there is a difference of being professional and representing a profession. That social workers are institution bound and dependent on their organizations. Different organizations promote different roles, and there is a wide variety of roles within social work. So we have to reflect more specifically which role we consider when we talk about the overall concept of social work. Because if we don't say social work in the social services or in child protection or whatever we mean, if we don't acknowledge the context, we will not be able to move further and gain better understanding of professional social work. I stop there. Thank you.